Hi, Russ here. Welcome back to my shop. Today I want to do a legacy building video, and it's about my new table. I think this one actually is going to work out very well. When you're milling a board, I had this table here I showed you a couple months ago, and when you put a piece down on here, I had a Xylus vise at this end, and I could put a piece in here and fasten it down pretty easily as long as I'm milling on this surface. But quite honestly, you can take any piece of wood and you can mill it on any one of three surfaces. And it'd be nice if you could do that easily, no matter which surface you want to do. For example, milling it here, or milling it on the edge, or milling it on the end. You want to be able to do any of those things as easily as the other. So this table here actually allows that to happen. I think I'm going to be able to do away with this table completely, and my whole setup will be here, and I can set up in less than 2 minutes no matter what piece of wood I want to do the milling on. Let me show you. First off, let's bring it in just a little closer, and we're going to zoom in so you can see this is the clamping surface of my leg vise. If you look at the leg vise here, you can see how the leg vise works. This is the pin board, so I can move this to wherever I need to adjust for the width of my piece. And this is what tightens it down, and it clamps right here. But what's different about this one is my vertical table here is actually a mini MFT table. I drilled an array of 3 holes in both directions, up, down, and across, and they're in alignment, just like an MFT table. And I put some dowels in here that I can push in and out, and if I want, I can take it out and put it in a different spot. And this is what allows me to clamp my pieces down firmly and repeatably, so that I can batch out 100 pieces, and it only takes me a few seconds to change the piece out each time to do my milling operation. Let me show you how it works. If we're going to mill, let's say, the edge of the board here, instead of this, we want to put a mortise in here. Well, what I would do is I would take my pad. You have your 2 pieces here. This side is the left side, this side is the right. I generally will adjust the left side based on the length of my board, when I hold it in place. For example, this board is being held here, so I might put it here so that I can sit on both of those dowels like that. And now this is actually referenced here in place on my y-axis and on my z-axis. So I can take this piece in and out and put it back, it's in the same spot. To reference it on the z-axis, on my MFT pad, out here, I'm going to take and put one more pin out, and I'm going to go ahead and do it on both sides. So now, if I have the table fastened down, and I drop this in, and push it this way, it's against here, I now have this board referenced in all 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. Referenced here to Z, referenced here to X, and referenced here to Y. So I can take this piece out, set it back in there, and it'll hold. So if I clamp this down right here, that's what I'll get. But if I'm milling this way, that's okay, because this can work as a stop and hold my piece steady. But if I'm milling this way, what's the possibility of this thing moving away from that pin? Yeah, it could. So what I do is I have this pin over here in row 1, this one in row 1 over here, these are in row 2, so it can drop down, and then I push my table over until this pin and this pin are holding this piece this way, gently. And now, with just gentle pressure back to square up the table, pushing against here to have this set in place, I now just take and just snug my table back down in this position. And now, when I bring my pieces up and clamp them down, this piece is now being held in place And in order to tighten it down, all you have to do is you spin it until it makes contact, and then about 3/4 of a turn is all it takes to hold that. And that piece is not going to go anywhere. And when you're ready to do your milling, when you take it out, you back this out, take that piece out, take your new piece, drop it back in, snug it back down. This piece is now ready to be milled just like the first one, and it'll come out identical with the Legacy without any problem. So changing your piece out and milling on the edge on this table becomes very simple. And it doesn't matter what length this board is. If I was doing this board instead, then I would just loosen my clamps and I extend it out this way. When I put it in here this way, put it here, snug this down here, and now I can hold this board just as quick and referenced just as quick this board the same way I did this short board. And it only took me a minute to set up to be able to mill this board and reference it so that if I'm doing multiple pieces, I can take it out, take my new one and put it in there, and it's set in the exact same place again. So, milling on the edge, this table works great. But let's talk about on the end. If you want to mill this on the end, then what you do first is you take your pad, MFT pad, and now we're going to put 2 pins in it, one in row 3 and one in row 1, and bring them out. So I have these 2 here, and that gives me a vertical reference here for my piece. I take a spacer block for whatever size, I cut it off to whatever size I need it to be, just a piece of scrap, so that I can set that on there. Now when I set this in, this thing is now zeroed out in all 3 directions, on the Z, the X, and the Y, and it's perfectly square in all directions without having to check it. And now I can take this piece. But if you're milling this piece, it's not being held in quite as good as it should be. So what we're going to do is that on this side, we put a pin in the first column, but in number 2 row. So these are on number 1 and number 3. This one is on row 2, so it's here. So this one, when it's pushing against it, it's going to push against these 2 to keep this thing vertical. So what I do is I loosen my table, draw it over till it touches my piece. Now I push back to square it, and against here, I snug my table down, and now this piece can be held vertically, and I can mill the end of this board any way I want to. I can do it by templating, I can do it by using my router, I can use my inker to do it. It doesn't matter what the milling is. The board though, and when I'm done, I can back this out, take my piece out, take my new one, drop it down in there, square my vise back up, tighten it, and that piece is now ready to be milled. So in just 15 seconds, I can change out my pieces when they're in the vertical position here and always have it correct. If the piece is a long piece, like this, I would do the same thing, but obviously I don't have enough room here. But if you remember, over here in my dust collection, I talked about having this dust collection area, and if I pull my dust collecting bucket out, I actually can go all the way to the floor. So if I set this vise up right over here, I now can put this piece in here and mill it in this machine on the end. So I can actually mill most furniture pieces on here also vertically in the same way that I did this piece. It's just a matter of setting up a Z reference so that you can always do it. And you can use the top for your Z reference instead. You could have a block that you set here with a double block and bring it in, bring it up, then snug it right where it is and have the same thing. Any kind of reference will work so that you can mill this piece even if it's a long piece. So now you see where you can mill with this table on the edge and on the end, and in all reality, it only takes you a minute or 2 to change the configuration. Right here is another example. This is 4 pieces of wood taped together, and I want to put finger joints on it and make it a box. Well, I can just as easily take this, back my clamps off, use the same dowel configuration that I have here, loosen my vise, or my left-hand vise, drop this in here, get it at the right point of where it needs to be, and when I put it there, now we bring this one over and put it up against there, and now we just made this thing straight and perpendicular in just a couple of minutes. And it's nice and square. It's holding this in place. So when I snug this down, I can bring my router over, mill this into finger joints, take the piece, take it out, drop it back in, and I do need to move this one to like so. And now I can mill this piece, and it's going to stay put just like the other piece did. And I can mill fingers on this, flip it, mill the fingers on the other end, and just that quick I made the sides of a box with finger joints using this vise. So this thing is real good for milling up wood, both on the edge and on the flat. But you actually can use this thing to mill flat work just like this other table over there does. I can take my piece here, and if I wanted to mill this piece up, I can actually put this piece in here. And I thought originally that I could put dowels here and pinch it down and hold it, but this did not hold very well in here, even though it's setting in there. So, but what I did discover is, what I can do is, for example, I have this piece here. I can take this, move these all out of the way. In this case, I think I'll just push them in out of the way. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now I can bring this piece. And what we want is to use these two here. So I'm going to put these right here. Yeah, right, okay. Now I can take my wedges. Instead, now I want to take down here, and I'm going to put a dowel to act as a stop. So now I'm now referencing this against here, and I know it's square, referenced against here, so this thing is now referenced in all directions. If I want to put a pin at this end to keep this from moving in any direction, I can just take another dowel and put it in this end, bring it up, push it, square it up, snug it down, and now this is held this way. And when I put the wedges in here, like so, this piece is now held. Quick and easy, it's held in place for me to do milling this area. Now, if I want this piece in the shorter piece like this, all I have to do is I take these two pieces and I reverse them so that this edge is touching this edge. Then I can work with these holes and it's closer together. And so this table will actually hold anything flat also, and again, any length you want. So that's how it works. I can now hold pieces in all 3 directions. Whoop. Sorry about that. I can hold it in all 3 directions. I can set it up in just a couple of minutes. No tools required except for my little hammer. So, other than that, I don't know what else to tell you. It's still a work in progress. I have some things about it I want to change. I may add some more holes in my pin board. I have 4 rows of them instead of just 2. So I may remake this top piece, and I want to do a couple things like that. But overall, this thing seems to work on all 3 directions of holding the board. So now I can use just this table, do away with that table completely, and anything I want to hold, I can set this table up in a couple of minutes. I can mill my piece, reset the table for how I need to do something else, and mill that, so I can go through my milling processes on multiple pieces very quickly and do the pieces very quickly while it's set up with my machine. So if you have any questions about this, leave them in the comments below. I didn't do any dimensional things about it because honestly this is a work in progress. I don't know where this thing is really going 100%. Like I said, what I have here, it's actually usable now. I will start using this table as it is now, and I'm going to make a few minor changes to it probably. So there'll be another update down the road, but if you wanted to, if you leave comments and I get enough of them about exact dimensions of this thing, I can go over all the critical pieces and how to make this so that you can make it for your machine. If I give you an exact plan, it won't work on the 900, and the plan won't work on the 1200 or 1500 because I have the 1200. But you should be able to get the concept without any problem. So if you have an interest in that, leave the comments about that, let me know, and I'll do a video about how this thing exactly is structured so you can understand how I put it together the way I did. So I want to thank you for stopping by, but there's one more thing I want to mention. I'm going to have an OTB moment here. This table, looking at how it works and everything, I was thinking that the double vise clamping is actually very effective for clamping pieces down. And instead of having my Moxon vise where I have the 2 screws and the piece is flat against here, if you had the double vise, I could then make this so that it doesn't matter how wide my piece is, I just move these further out and clamp them to my bench top. You could use something very similar to this to do a leg vise, a horizontal leg vise for a workbench. So you could hold anything very quickly and easily just by putting those 2 on your table, clamping them down, and then put your piece in there and move them where you need them to be able to use the double vise. The double vise here is the key to this. I'm going to have to show you one more thing here, sorry. And that is, when you're using this part here, the legs, one thing you got to keep in mind is that when your piece is in here and you want to hold it down in there, what you're going to do is you want to make sure that your leg vise is actually skewed at an angle. You do not want it. Let me get these up closer so you can see what I'm talking about. You want this thing to be actually skewed at an angle so that only the tip on each of these is what's holding. So if I want to hold this piece, this thickness, what I would do here is probably move my pin out to the hole number 4. And if I go to hole number 4, that's going to give me a little bit more of a skew here so that just this point is touching. And now when I tighten this down, this is more likely to hold this flat and parallel against my holding surface, which has sandpaper on it and it's perfectly flat. That's the surface that this thing's going to flat in reference to, not to the jaw, because the jaw can change on you and shift. So the jaw is just holding it, and it put it up against there, and then you give it a little bit of snug. You don't have to go much. In fact, you don't want to go too hard because that will put an indentation into your piece if you're not careful. So I'm working on trying to figure out how to keep this from damaging. So maybe put a flat angle on here at the right angle so that I get a little bit bigger surface touching, but I'm not sure. Make some kind of jaw. We'll see. But when you use this, you absolutely want this thing to be at an angle coming in and touching instead of flat. like on a Moxon vise. So keep that in mind. That's how you determine where you put your pin. And it'll give you much better holding power then when you put these and crank them down. Doesn't take much torque. Even with these small wing nuts here, I make contact. It's less, probably a half a turn to 3/4 of a turn, and it's more than tight enough to hold this piece in place. So keep that in mind. If you start to build your own, you have questions about it, leave me comments. I will try to help guide you through it and what to watch for, and maybe watch out some of the pitfalls that I fell into when I started trying to make this to begin with. So, but that's where I'm at. I'm happy with what I got now. It is a functional table, and I now can mill on all 3 sides of any board. I like that. It really makes this machine the #1 machine in my shop as far as I'm concerned. Because once I get this squared up, my pieces, and I'm ready to do all my joinery work or decorative work on them, and I'm doing flat milling type work, I don't have to use my handheld router. I don't have to use my router table. I don't have to use my Panta router. Everything migrates to this machine here instead. And this, I can do the same thing in very quick order using this table to be able to put my pieces in and out and be able to do the machine work using that one instead. So this should be your #1 machine in your shop, believe it or not, if you have one. And I don't understand why somebody would buy a machine like this and then turn around and buy a horizontal router or build a Panta router, because this will do everything those machines do and then some. And now I can do it just as fast or faster than they can, with definitely, I think, more accuracy than you can on some of those for some of the cuts. So that's my thought. I appreciate you stopping by. Most importantly, though, there's going to be more to come, so please, you come back again, okay? See ya.